saw it today. George Zimmerman appearing in court for the first time since turning himself in. It happened this morning. The charge of second-degree murder in the killing of Trayvon Martin was read to him by the judge. Very short hearing. A date of May 29th has been set for Zimmerman's formal arraignment. We've been keeping an eye on what you're asking on Twitter, on Facebook, on our own website, checking out your reactions and gathering your questions. We're happy to have defense attorney Brian Claypool here to answer some of your questions. Brian, so glad you're with us. The first question is from Alexander Corvin here. It's not one we normally hear from, but we want to give everyone a platform to ask this question. He says this: if I were a neighborhood watch member and saw some kid in a hoodie at night with a backpack who didn't belong there, I would be asking questions too. If he were to attack me, I would defend myself by any means necessary. What exactly should he be arrested for this? Why should he be? Meaning, he doesn't see why Zimmerman was arrested to begin with. What do you say to that?
Well, a neighborhood watch person is not a police officer, and he's not trained to be a police officer. So when George Zimmerman called 911, like he should have done, and the 911 operator said stop following him, then he needed to stop following him.
Brian, I think that is the most damaging evidence against Zimmerman, because we hear it in the 911 call, him saying, so wait a minute, you're following this guy? We don't need you to do that. And then we find out that a 17-year-old, Trayvon, is dead.
Right, he can't take the law into his own hands. We can't endorse this. It's like being a vigilante then. And
the self-proclaimed neighborhood watch is what I also have a problem with. Nobody officially appointed him. As you said, he's not a police officer, and he's armed.
Right. And the other problem, too, Susan, is at what point do we have to stop people from just looking at somebody because of possibly their race or what they look like and going and questioning them? I find that troublesome as well.
This is question number 2, saying self-defense, my behind. I'm quoting here. How is it self-defense when he followed the poor kid and the 911 operator clearly asked him not to, what we just talked about? So there's a lot of people on that side of the fence here.
Yeah, there's no question that in my mind, Mr. Zimmerman provoked, I think, this incident. And when he went up to Trayvon Martin and a scuffle happened, George Zimmerman cannot rely on the use of lethal force at that point in time. And I think it's also important that we get the autopsy report and the forensics here as well. I think the problem we have in this case is we don't have all the information.
Right.
We're missing a lot of the pieces of the puzzle.
And forensics will certainly be key here, Brian.
Yeah, we need to find out the distance that George Zimmerman was from Trayvon Martin when he shot him. The autopsy report is going to speak volumes toward that, because then you can make an argument, if it's a further distance, that George Zimmerman really didn't have a reasonable belief that his life was in threat.
And this is a very specific question from one of our viewers. They want to know, what does sealing court records actually mean? That they'll be sealed from the public? We won't know what's inside of the court records?
Well, right now the court records are being sealed, and that's to preserve the integrity of the ongoing investigation. We don't want the names of witnesses released so that people can possibly contact them and possibly intimidate them. So it's to preserve the integrity of the investigation.
And Brian, this is a big one. We talked about it during the commercial break. This is from Teresa Robertson. She says, what is the difference between first and second-degree murder? And I wanted to add on this, could there be a lesser charge of manslaughter submitted to the jury once it does go to trial? So it's not just second-degree murder that we're looking at here, right?
Right, and the answer to your question is yes, and there should be a lesser charge available with manslaughter. The difference between first and second-degree murder, one word, premeditation. I mean, Angela Corey had no shot at a first-degree conviction because there's no evidence to really support a premeditation. George Zimmerman didn't get up that night and say, hey, I'm going to go find a young black man and get in a fight and kill him. So that's the big difference. But I think that she should also seek the what's called excusable homicide in Florida too, and that involves the heat of passion.
What about stand your ground law? A lot of people have been talking about this. This is my own question. When does that come into play? Is it a pre-trial question in terms of what the judge has to rule on?
That's a good question. There's going to be what's called an immunity hearing, and that's before there will ever be a trial in the case. The next step is going to be an arraignment, and I think that's May 29th. That's when the formal charges are read. Zimmerman's going to plead not guilty. But then after that, Zimmerman's lawyer will have a chance to have an immunity hearing, and he's going to put up evidence to suggest that George Zimmerman acted in self-defense and that he's protected by the stand the ground law. And that's what's really exciting about this case, because a judge, one single judge, is going to be given the opportunity to decide whether or not Zimmerman gets that immunity, the whole case could be over at that point.
The whole case, it could be riding on that.
That's right.
Brian Claypool, thanks so much. You've cleared up a lot for our viewers. We know we're going to have you back. Appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.